The metal is still hot. I can feel it through my palms, the barrel of a .50 caliber Browning machine gun, still smoking, and my hands wrapped around it like I was born holding it. Above me, the sky is on fire. Not the sky I grew up under in Texas. This sky is a different kind, black smoke and orange flame, and the sound of metal tearing through metal, over and over, like God himself is ripping a page out of history. They told me I was not allowed to touch a weapon. They put that in writing. They put me in a kitchen. And now I am standing here on the bridge of the USS West Virginia, the captain bleeding out at my feet, planes screaming overhead, and I have a choice to make that no training manual ever prepared me for. Not a military choice, a theological one. Does the God who made me, who gave me these hands, this body, this rage, does he want me to put it down? Or did he put me here, on this exact deck, on this exact morning, for a reason no admiral will ever understand? By the end of this you will have to choose a side. My name is Doris Miller, but everyone called me Dory. And this is the story they folded into one sentence in the history books, then moved on. I was born October 12, 1919, in Waco, Texas. Cotton fields. Red dust. My mother's hands, calloused and certain, pressing food into mine before sunrise. Waco. You need to understand what that word meant in 1919 for a black family in Texas. 3 years before I came into the world, in that same town, a young black man named Jesse Washington was chained to a tree in front of City Hall. 15,000 people came to watch. They brought their children. Some of them sent postcards home. I never saw it. But I grew up inside the silence of people who had. My mother read me the Psalms at night. Not the comfortable ones. Psalm 144. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle. I used to think that was a strange verse for a woman who told me never to fight back. Now I think she knew something I didn't. In September 1939, I enlisted in the United States Navy. I was 19 years old. I was the heavyweight boxing champion of the entire fleet, 213 pounds of muscle that had never lost a fight. They handed me an apron. Mess attendant. 3rd class. A kitchen boy. Black men were not permitted to hold weapons. Black men were not permitted to serve in combat roles. That was not an oversight. That was policy. Written down. Signed. Filed. I peeled potatoes on the USS West Virginia, and I told God that he had a plan I could not see yet. There were mornings I believed that. There were mornings I did not. Let me tell you what they don't put in the official record. The morning of December 7, 1941, I was not afraid. That is the part that has always surprised people when I say it. I had been collecting laundry. Officers' laundry. Ironing the shirts of men who did not know my last name, only my rank, only my function, only the thing they were permitted to see when they looked at me. 7:53 in the morning. The first bomb hit like the earth had forgotten it was supposed to stay still. I heard it before I felt it. A sound not like an explosion, more like the moment right before an explosion. That half second when every molecule in the air decides what it is going to become. Then the ship tilted. Then everything was fire. I ran. Not away. Toward. I do not know how to explain that to someone who has never been in that moment when your body moves before your mind gives the order. When your feet find a direction that is not logical but is somehow exactly right. I found Captain Mervyn Bennion on the bridge. He had taken shrapnel to the stomach. He was conscious. He was trying to give orders. I picked him up. 213 pounds of muscle, and I have never been more grateful for every potato I peeled, every bag I carried, every task they gave me to keep me small. Because in that moment, my body was the only thing standing between a good man and death. I moved him to cover. Across flame-lit deck plates, through smoke that turned the world into a gray nothing, to the far side of the bridge where the fire had not reached yet. He died anyway. I held his hand at the end. He did not ask my name. I did not offer it. Here is the part no one talks about: what happened in the silence between putting Mervyn Bennion down and picking up that gun. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Not a voice. Not a vision. Not the kind of thing you put in a testimony and expect people to believe. Something simpler than that, and stranger. The particular stillness of a man who has been told his whole life that his hands were made for serving and suddenly understands, in his body, not his mind, that serving and saving are not always the same thing. 43 men were still alive on that bridge. I counted. The Browning was unmanned. I had never been trained on it. I had been deliberately, systematically kept away from every weapon on that ship. The entire architecture of the United States military had been designed, in part, to make sure that this moment a black man standing freely over a loaded weapon would never happen. And yet, I fired for 15 minutes. That is what the record says. 15 minutes. It sounds short when you read it. It was not short. It was the longest sustained act of my life, longer than any fight I had ever won. Longer than any prayer I had ever finished. I do not know how many planes I hit. The Navy does not know, either. What I know is this: I pulled that trigger, and the gun worked, and for 15 minutes, the sky above the USS West Virginia had one less advantage than the Japanese had planned for. When the ammunition ran out, I put the gun down. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From something I had no name for. Not yet. On May 27, 1942, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz stood on the deck of the USS Enterprise and pinned the Navy Cross to my chest. He said I had distinguished myself in the face of enemy attack. The photographers were there. The Navy made sure of that. "Here is your hero," they said. "Here is proof that this country is worth fighting for. Here is your black man with his medal, your symbol of democracy in action. Tell your brothers to enlist. Tell them there is a place for them here." I smiled for the photographs. I went back to my kitchen. That is not a metaphor. I was reassigned. Still mess attendant. Still peeling. Still serving. Still folding the laundry of men who wore their rank on their collars like a second skin. The medal was real. The ceremony was real. The promotion was not. I told myself God had a larger plan. I told myself the Navy Cross would mean something, that the country would see what I had done and understand that its own laws were a lie. I believed that. I want to be honest with you. I believed it completely. And then the Navy assigned me to the USS Liscombe Bay, an escort carrier headed for the Gilbert Islands. And I thought, yes, combat. Finally. This is what the medal was building toward. I thought that all the way to November 24, 1943. I thought it right up until the Japanese torpedo hit the ammunition magazine. The ship went down in 23 minutes. 644 men did not come home. I was 24 years old. If this story is pressing on something inside you right now, just type "Amen" in the comments. Let me know you're here with me. Everything I just told you is true. Every date. Every name. Every minute. And here is what I need you to sit with before I continue, because this next part is harder. And I will not soften it for you. I have told you about my faith as a force. A thing that moved my hands. That held me in the fire. That gave 15 minutes of empty sky above a burning ship some kind of meaning. But faith does not exist in a vacuum. Faith exists in a system. And the system I was born into, the system I served, the system I died serving, had very specific ideas about what a black man's faith was supposed to produce. Submission. Endurance. Silence. So let me ask you a different question now, not the one the Navy asked. Not the one the newspapers asked. Let me ask the one that kept me awake in that kitchen for 2 years before the bombs ever fell. What is faith actually worth when the institution that benefits from your faith will never let you rise? But so is this. There is one document they did not want you to read. It was published in the Pittsburgh Courier on January 31, 1942, less than 2 months after Pearl Harbor, before my name was even public. A man named James G. Thompson wrote a letter to the editor. He called it the Double V Campaign. Victory abroad. Victory at home. He asked the question that no military press release would ever ask: why should black men die for a democracy that does not include them? I want you to hold that letter next to my Navy Cross and tell me what you see. Because I have thought about it. I have thought about the specific distance between those two objects: a letter from a black man asking why, and a medal given to a black man who stopped asking. I grew up in Waco, Texas. You know what that means now. You know about Jesse Washington. You know about the postcard. You know that the silence in my mother's house was not peace, it was the particular silence of people who had learned that certain sounds got you killed. My mother taught me Psalm 144. Trains my hands for war. She taught me faith. But she also taught me to make myself small in rooms where white men were present. She taught me to look at my shoes at the right moments. She taught me that there was a difference between what God intended for you and what the world would allow you to become. That is not cynicism. That is survival theology, and it is as old as this country. And I obeyed it. For 2 years on that ship, I obeyed it so completely that I became invisible. I learned the laundry schedule for 17 officers. I knew who took starch in their collars and who preferred soft. I knew the smell of every bunk on that vessel. I was the heavyweight boxing champion of the entire fleet. They gave me an apron. I want you to sit with that specific humiliation not as a symbol, but as a daily material reality. Every morning, putting on that uniform, going down into that galley, reminding your body and your spirit that the nation you were born in had decided your size. Was that faith? Was that obedience? Or was that, and I need you to be honest with me, was that a man so conditioned by generations of terror that he called his conditioning by a holy name? I need to tell you what the Navy did with my story. After Nimitz pinned that medal to my chest, they sent me on a tour. Recruitment posters. Radio appearances. Here is Doris Miller. Here is what a black man can do in service to this country. Here is why you should enlist. I was a symbol. And symbols do not get promoted. I want you to understand the precision of what happened. They used my 15 minutes of defiance to recruit more black men into the same segregated system that had created my 15 minutes of defiance. They extracted the image of power and erased the context of oppression that made it necessary. That is not faith rewarded. That is faith exploited. But wait, there is something historians have hidden for centuries. The Navy knew my name before the press did. The official report of my actions was filed in December 1941. It sat in a drawer for months. When the Pittsburgh Courier began demanding recognition for black servicemen, the Navy released my story not because they believed in justice, but because they needed a recruitment tool. They chose the timing of my heroism. Think about that. They chose when the world would learn what I did. They packaged it. They controlled the narrative of a moment that was, at its core, a black man defying the institution that was packaging it. And when the photographers were done, and the radio spots were recorded, and the posters were printed, they sent me back to the kitchen. I died on November 24, 1943. Mess attendant first class. They had promoted me one grade. After all of that. 644 men died with me on the Liscombe Bay. I do not know how many of them enlisted because they saw my photograph. I do not know how many of them believed as I had believed that their service would mean something beyond their service. My mother would have said, "God's ways are not our ways." And I believe that. I do. But I also believe this. There is a difference between faith that liberates and faith that domesticates. And the people in power, the people who write the policies, who print the posters, who decide which stories get told and when, they have always known the difference. They have always preferred the second kind. Here's what the historical record shows. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Doris Miller performed actions that the Navy's own investigation confirmed were above and beyond the requirements of his role. He moved an injured officer under fire. He operated a weapon he had been explicitly forbidden to touch. He did this without orders, without training, without the institutional permission that every other man on that bridge had been given. He was the first African American to receive the Navy Cross. He died 23 months later, still classified as a mess attendant. The USS Miller, a destroyer escort, was named in his honor in 1973, 30 years after his death. The naming ceremony was attended by his mother. In 2020, the United States Navy announced that an aircraft carrier, the USS Doris Miller, would bear his name. It is currently under construction. A ship named after a man they would not allow to serve on a ship as a sailor. I want you to hold both of those things at the same time, because that is the only honest way to hold Doris Miller's story. On one side, a young man from Waco, Texas, who reached through every law designed to diminish him and found something larger than those laws on a burning deck. 2. Operated by instinct or by something deeper than instinct. 2. In 15 minutes, became the clearest possible argument that the system confining him was a lie. On the other side, a system that took that argument and turned it into a poster that used his defiance as currency, that gave him a medal and sent him back to the galley and put him on a ship that sank with 644 men and did not find a way to keep him alive or promote him or change the policy that had defined him as a kitchen boy from the day he enlisted. Both of these things are true. If you believe someone in your life needs to hear this story today, share this video right now. That is your blessing to give them. The sources behind everything you heard: Doris Miller's official Navy deposition, held at the Naval History and Heritage Command. The Double V campaign letters archived at the Library of Congress, African American Perspectives Collection. Records on the Waco Horror at blackpast.org. Ame Church Theological Writings on Psalm 144 and Liberation Theology. Full links are in the description. Because Doris Miller's story deserves more than assumptions. It deserves the truth. What stayed with me most about Dory Miller was not the 15 minutes. It was the 3 or 4 seconds before, the ones no one saw, the ones that didn't make the record. The moment between putting a dying man down and picking up a gun. That pause. Whatever happened in that pause, whatever he heard, or felt, or decided, that is the story. Everything else is the consequence. A 24-year-old from Waco, Texas, standing alone on a burning deck, making a decision that the entire architecture of American military power had spent years trying to make impossible. He made it anyway. 2,000 years of faith. 400 years of struggle. And one morning, 23 minutes of fire on the Pacific. Doris Miller did not live to see his name on a ship. He did not live to see the policy change. He did not live to see the country become, even imperfectly, the thing he died for. What he lived to see was 15 minutes. And I have asked myself more times than I can count whether that was enough. Whether God, if God was present on that deck, considered that sufficient. Whether the algebra of sacrifice and justice and faith ever actually balances. I do not have that answer. But here's the question I want to leave you with. If you were standing where Dory stood in the galley of a ship that had decided your ceiling, in a country that had decided your worth, holding the specific humiliation of being the strongest man in the fleet and being handed an apron? Would your faith give you the strength to endure it? Or would it give you the courage to refuse? Now you know what I know. So tell me, Team A or Team B? Drop your answer below and tell me why. Because 400 years of history deserves more than silence. He did not pray before he fired. He did not ask permission. He just pulled the trigger. And she worked fine. That is the most theological sentence in the history of the United States Navy.